Hi, this is Jim Janossy. I'm sorry I wasn't able to make it to Chicago on March the 1st to give this presentation in person. Combination of circumstances and some delays at the airport that I had anticipated in flying in from Los Angeles. I made this video and I'm posting it to more or less give the presentation that I was planning on giving this morning at the MBAA conference. What you're going to find here is really two things. There are two papers, well, actually short write-ups. I wouldn't call them formal papers. One is an abstract, and it deals with the methodical formation of teams using some very simple web resources and combining them in a way that seems to make sense. The other is a write-up that's actually the appendix in a workbook that I created for a course I teach at DePaul University, GPH 205, Historical Foundations of Visual Technology. The write-up deals with teaching online without the use of a learning management system, at least not making the learning management system the focus and the content manager for your original work and for the assignments and the other supportive materials for a course. The way to do that is to actually place your original materials into a workbook form and use QR codes and short URL aliases with a redirector to provide access to the video materials that support your course. I'll go over the advantages of this, one of which includes the fact that as traditional publishing, a workbook is something that you retain the copyright on. There's no question that the material is yours, unlike the case with material that you may write and put into a learning management system. Once you use somebody else's proprietary system to house your materials, there's always the element of loss of control, but there's also the simple fact that possession is 9/10 of the law. And having used somebody's proprietary system to create your material and to house it, you may have inadvertently parted with some of the control over that material. This, I think, is going to be a growing issue as online takes prominence in higher education. So without further ado, let me switch over to a screen type of a capture as opposed to my video capture. I would have conducted this little presentation using these techniques in person, but I think you'll get very much the same effect by what follows. The first short presentation I was planning on making at the MBAA conference on March the 1st, 2013, is represented by this short two-page write-up. Methodical team formation. By that I mean using some mechanism other than a hodgepodge of random grouping of students to form working teams in a course. I was teaching an introductory course for incoming freshmen, and I wanted to group them into working teams of two. Thinking about it, I realized that it would be better than just trying to group them by their geographical origin or some other factor if I could have them assess something of their own personality and likes and dislikes, and the Myers-Briggs Test that I found online was a way to do that. That test consists of 72 true-false questions, and having answered them, 4 numbers are produced that measure different aspects of a person's personality. On the second page of this extended abstract, I give you a number of references, documents that I located in doing some research on this, that provide some of the background of grouping students according to their personality and preferences. What I just mentioned, however, in terms of assessing personalities, is found at this link. This website is one that I located that actually does administer a very simple Myers-Briggs test of 72 yes-no questions. All that a person has to do in answering this is to indicate a yes or no answer for questions like this. You are almost never late for your appointments. True. You like to be engaged in an active and fast-paced job. Yes. You enjoy having a wide circle of acquaintances. Perhaps no. you feel involved when watching TV soaps? No. You're usually the first to react to a sudden event, such as the telephone ringing or unexpected question. Yes. And if you progress all the way through this, and I won't bore you with doing that right now, you'll wind up with 4 numbers. I will make those answers right now simply to expedite this, and in editing this video, I'll chop out most of this drudgery so that you're not burdened by watching it. That's the magic, doing some simple video editing to make the viewer much more productive and make the video presentation much more concise. And I just finished making those selections, so let's move on to score this. What results from this is a couple of numbers here, which is really what I'm interested in. Now, if somebody really wanted to figure out something about themselves, these items here would be interesting to click on. This is a personality type that's further described here. While that might be interesting, the only thing I'm concerned about here are these actual numbers. And at this point, I would write them down simply to remember them. And the idea is now, I want to find out some way of matching people together so that perhaps I could record one number on a spreadsheet and sort the students on the roster into sequence to group them so that apparently like personalities can be grouped together. Well, how do we do this? One way of doing this that occurred to me was simply to do a regression line using these values. Now, the Myers-Briggs test just gives 4 values. It turns out that this little regression calculator that's available on the web wants at least 5 values, so I just repeat the last one. And what I asked the students to do was to indicate 1, comma, the first value, 2, comma, the second value, 3, comma, the third value, 4, comma, the fourth value, and then just to repeat the fourth value. When we submit the data, well, it turns out that my having answered questions without really regard to what the question was gives me a very strange sort of a plot here. But it doesn't matter. The only thing I'm looking for here is this slope value. And it's my contention that the slope value here is a good enough indicator of the personality and preferences for my purposes. My purposes are only simply to get one value for each student that I can use to group them. And I suspect that this is unique enough, a unique enough way to summarize the meaning of these 4 different personality measures, that the grouping would be adequate. Now, the time that I tried this out in the autumn of 2011, I got some interesting results. By and large, the team seemed to function pretty well. In fact, I strongly suspect that at least in one case, these people may be dating at this moment and might even have entered into a long-term relationship because they seemed so compatible. All in all, it appeared to me that the results were much more favorable for productive student work in teams, at least teams of 2, than would have been the case had I just done some random grouping. So I would suggest that this little mechanism may serve at least 2 useful purposes. For one thing, if you face the issue of forming teams in a course that you're teaching, you might want to consider this little 2-step process of the link for the Myers-Briggs test and this simple little way of compressing the meaning of 4 independent number values into one value that can be used then to group students together. That, as a practical purpose, may give you a positive result in the same way that it gave me a positive result. Another purpose of this, however, is someone may want to mount a little bit of research on this and come up with a more formal paper designing some experiment to actually try it out and perhaps measure the productivity in some way, or a focus group, or some sort of qualitative assessment of how productive teams formed in this way might be. I would mount that type of research myself, except for timing purposes and for a number of things going on, I simply don't have the time to put into it at the moment. If anybody would like to collaborate on that, I'd be happy to contribute something to the effort. And if anyone else wanted to take prime authorship of it, that's just fine with me. Perhaps if you have a student engaged in research in a master's thesis or for PhD work, I doubt that this is sufficient for the topic of a dissertation, but it may be an interesting sidelight, an interesting way to explore something about team dynamics and perhaps even grouping groups larger than teams of two. Now let's take a look at the second thing I was going to present, which is larger in scope and deals with teaching online or in the classroom, gaining the benefits of multimedia without having to burden yourself with the use of a learning management system. In this second presentation, we get to some really fun stuff. What I'm going to do is explain to you here the rationale behind the workbook that you see pictured here, but let me show you another picture of the cover of that and a second workbook that I've also prepared for a second course. I started teaching GPH 205, Historical Foundations of Visual Technology, in 2005. The course was designed by another person, but never taught by that person, and I fleshed it out, chose the book, and started writing up assignments, which I eventually gathered together in paper form first of all, and worked with Stipes Publishing of Champaign to create this workbook. In its third edition, I adapted it to doing the course fully online. That's one course I currently teach fully online at DePaul University. Another course that I began to teach in 2011, I call Contemporary Computing. It's actually CSC 200, Survey of Computing. This course exposes students to computer concepts and modern computer usage. Both GPH 205 and CSC 200 meet our liberal studies program general education requirements, so I often have many more liberal arts students than computer science students in these courses. The write-up that you see here consists of several pages that I've taken from two locations in this workbook. This fresh approach to online learning is really a little bit of explanation of how and why I choose to package all my original materials and all the web links for resources supporting the course in print published form using this rather modern device of a QR code to allow students to access these materials with mobile devices as well as computers. The idea of packaging material this way is that we can gain the flexibility and leverage these mobile devices such as smart cell phones that are increasingly in use by our student body and which really are more predominant than laptop computers. This QR code can be scanned by free software on a smart cell phone or a tablet computer, and it can access the video materials related to this page. However, what are you going to do if somebody is not using a smart cell phone but a computer and using this material in print published form? That's the reason for this little URL, which is really the URL of a redirector that I've set up. I can control by licensing a URL and by making this the name of some HTML, I can control what this is, and it's always very short. That's very important for one reason. If somebody has to enter this manually, you want it to be short and reliable to enter. But another reason is that because this is the code for a redirector, I can always reposition this. I can point it to something else even after this material is in print. Conceivably, I could even have this published and not have anything out here at the time that it's published and only add that later. This is really important for your own flexibility in replacing lectures, but also because you might want to use material created by somebody else and it may dry up. I make an awful lot of use of YouTube videos created by others, and there's some very good material out there. If something becomes unavailable, I want to be able to point this at something else to take its place. You can read through this, my rationale for doing things this way. On page 2, you'll see some information for instructors that points to this appendix, which is originally at the end of the workbook for GPH 205. The reason I've included it here is that I actually tell you how I went about doing this. Part of the process is a very interesting, inexpensive tool that I find is actually handier than Adobe Acrobat. Acrobat is a $500 piece of software. One of its many functions is to concatenate PDFs. I found another tool, Qt PDF Pro, for 1/10 of that price that does even better, fast and flexibly and easy to use, to concatenate PDFs and to apply page numbers such as this and footings such as this once you've assembled all the PDFs. If you consider writing your materials in separate pieces, as I did by default when I first took over this class, you can then assemble it into workbook form very easily by concatenating the PDFs. And the PDFs can be created using different types of software. In the workbooks I create, I've used a combination of PDFs produced from Word, PDFs output by Excel, and PDFs output by PowerPoint. Once the documents are in PDF form, they can all be concatenated and paginated in exactly this way. What is the end product? For me, the end product is a PDF file that is the entire contents of a workbook, which I send to Stipes Publishing in Champaign, Illinois, a workbook publisher. Stipes does really great work in taking that one consolidated PDF and creating a print-published workbook with an ISBN number, which they arrange to get into the bookstore. All my students have my material without me ever having to do anything with the distribution process. And for my purposes, the most important thing is I retain the copyright on those materials. Some other benefits, though. A small amount of royalties accrues from this. It doesn't cost you. It actually pays to do this. Just like traditional textbook publishing. Only these types of materials are much less expensive. They're printed in black and white. How does that work for color? Well, you put out there behind a QR code like this anything you want to in color on the web, and everybody's mobile or laptop or computer devices these days provides color. It's a very inexpensive way to provide color, but having print-published material that's black and white and inexpensive. These workbooks typically cost less than $30. In the case of GPH 205, there's an assigned textbook, and there's the workbook, which is the course. In the case of CSC 200, there's only the workbook, which costs in the $20 range. It replaced a textbook we used to specify that was approaching $100 in cost. The textbook at $100 is less useful to us than a workbook designed for our 10-week terms. By putting the entire contents of the course in the workbook, with all the video and web resources accessed by way of QR codes or these little symbols, it's much more convenient for students, it's much more economical, and it also reduces cognitive load. That is, the complexity associated with simply getting to information as opposed to the information itself and learning from it. That's a very big number for me. I've, for many years, attempted to assist faculty in using learning management systems and students in using these systems. The time spent in learning how to use those systems, both on the faculty side and on the student side, is wasted time. It doesn't accomplish anything to do with subject matter learning. And as those systems evolve and become more complex, the matter gets worse. My goal is to hook my students up with video materials and web-based materials that supplement and guide them in their learning. If I can do that without having to use a learning management system as the middleman, we all benefit in a number of ways. You'll notice that there are several places where there's boxes with a little yellow coloring in them. That's kind of a standard I've adopted for indicating things that you can click on. Now, one reason I did that was that it's kind of a common technique of Apple's Safari browser to circle URLs when you're reading them in a PDF document. I think that's a little better than just underlining them, which is the ordinary standard for URLs. And to lighten them up with yellow makes the electronic presentation of this material a little more interesting. But I think one more thing that I discovered as students requested these things to be provided online was that if I make this into a hyperlink in itself, then there are really three different ways of accessing this material. If this is provided as a PDF directly to students, having this be an active link is really important, because then if you're reading this on a computer, you simply click this. If you're reading it on something like an iPad, you tap it. And in this case, what I'm showing you at that link is how I provide videos, web-based materials to my students with a little bit of simple HTML. Now, this series of videos could have been placed into a YouTube playlist, but I think it's a little more fun to put together a little bit of HTML like this. The idea being that when you click this, you branch to a video. You can scroll down, and when you click on another icon, you go on to another video. Let me show you what this looks like. I'll just simulate what it looks like on an iPad or an iPod or a cell phone. These icons are smaller, and it comes up like this. They work exactly the same way. This is really a convenience that's well appreciated by students, and as more and more of them begin to use mobile devices that they already have, such as a smart cell phone, you extend the reach of these materials. Learning management systems are trying hard to become relevant to mobile devices. But in fact, learning management systems are already obsolescent. They're complex, they're expensive, they get in the way of learning. I don't mean to offend vendors that make their livelihood from this, but frankly, I don't think the learning management system should be the center of attention or the focal point for online learning. With a method like this, you can get your students connected with video materials or other web resources much easier and much more directly. And to form these materials, you only need a word processor. Any modern word processor, even the free products such as the OpenOffice and others, can create PDFs directly. You don't need any kind of a converter to do this. A simple tool like QtPDF Pro will let you concatenate, paginate, and label those materials, putting out one consolidated file, learning materials for students. These kinds of things, as active hyperlinks, carry right on through to the finished PDF. And if you're interested in really providing learning materials that relate to modern devices by way of QR codes, let me just wrap up by showing you how easy it is to create a QR code. This is an active link that goes to one of many generators of QR codes on the web. This is free. If I say that I want to create a QR code for a place on the web, a URL address, and I'm just going to use a special one here, ee4.me/Janossy. ee4.me is a URL I licensed. It costs about $20 a year. It costs me about $5 a month to host it. That's where I park all the materials that I put out there except videos. Videos go on YouTube because I, for one, like to have the exposure of YouTube, and I like for students who may be interested in my classes to be able to check things out ahead of time. So I don't hide things in a learning management system. To create a QR code for that, it's as simple as putting the URL in here. I always choose the small size of the QR code and to generate it. This I can now right mouse click on. I can save the image as, and I might save it just for the purpose of demonstration here. This is janossy.png, and I'm going to save it. Now if I go look at this, and I'm going to, at this point, just preview it. That little pattern, if you scan it by way of a cell phone or an iPad or an iPod or any tablet computer, that will take you to the URL that I've encoded there. This particular URL, if I were to go there, takes you to the download for the two documents that form the basis of these two presentations for MBAA. There are tools available today that will let you create your learning materials in this format. I think you might want to try that. I think you might want to benefit from hooking your students up with your learning materials in a very direct way. You might find, as I have, that this is much more productive than grappling with the arcane rules and tools and constraints of a learning management system in order to get learning materials to your students. Even if you're forced to use a learning management system, you may want to put your own original materials into this format and work with a publisher like Stipes Publishing of Champaign to gain the benefit of this more direct access that you'll provide to your students to your materials, and in order to clearly distinguish and package your original learning materials in a way that lets you retain total control over those materials. I would strongly suggest you think twice before putting your own original learning materials into a proprietary learning management system. This is an alternative, even if you are forced to use a learning management system by your institution. You can package your materials this way, and they are separate from your learning management system. You may use your learning management system for various other activities, or as I do, I subscribe to Moodle, an open source learning management system, purely for the purpose of online exercises, which I allow my students to repeat during the term. If I were to use discussion boards, I would put them into Moodle. I pay $1 a year per student, $150 a year, to put up to 150 students at any point in time into that system. I think it's marvelous. I think institutions ought to seriously consider outsourcing their learning management system support in this very same way. There are multiple outsourcers who provide Moodle. I think the day is long past when we need to have expensive proprietary systems licensed by an institution and even more expensive support staffs to run them and train people to use them. That's kind of letting the tail wag the dog. Why not create your materials this way, simply with a word processor, and distribute them in this form, and leave the complexity of a proprietary learning management system as a footnote in history? I think the day is past when we need them. Hopefully this will give you some ideas to think about. Download these two pieces of writing from the URL that's appearing on the screen, and if you'd care to correspond with me about these ideas, please feel free to do that. My email address, jjanossy@depaul.edu, is also appearing on the screen right now. Thanks a lot, and I hope you've enjoyed these presentations.